Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo, bringing you another video talking about Star Trek Online. And in today's video, it's going to be my first video on talking about the Star Trek Online timeline. Now, for me, because of how long this is taking for me to do in total, there's going to be a lot of parts to this. And I'm not actually going to be able to get into the real Star Trek Online timeline in terms of my own theories behind it for probably about a month or so. There's going to be a lot of preliminary stuff I have to go over, including the methodology that I will be using to construct all this. So a lot of this video is going to be going over that methodology in general, both what will not be included in terms of what I will consider, and my general process figuring out a couple of really important things in terms of how the order of certain missions are, general timelines for how long those missions take, etc. Alongside that, I'm also going to be including in this video, just at the end as quickly as I can, my thoughts about communication and debating that I did not cover on Saturday. There's a lot of things I was going to cover, and then I realized, oh, like 95% of that stuff that I was going to talk about is already available online. I've actually included a new YouTube link, a YouTube suggested channel on my homepage for YouTube that you all can look at. It's called Extra Credits, and they cover a lot of really great stuff about gaming. So for a lot of the stuff that I have very similar opinions on, they have covered it fairly extensively, even as far back as like 5 years ago. So feel free to check out a lot of their stuff. It'll be supplementary to the very few things that I think that they haven't covered yet. Especially because, I mean, this channel is about Star Trek, so obviously that's going to be a huge slant that I'll be talking about later on in the video. Will be in a slant in terms of Star Trek. So to start off with, we have to go over my base assumptions before I do my calculation assumptions. So first off, what I will be including for the Star Trek Online timeline is obviously everything that's considered canon. Now the things that are only hard canon inside of Star Trek is all of the Star Trek TV shows and the movies, which the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, Enterprise, and kind of Discovery. When I go more in depth in this later in a different video, I'll explain why Discovery has some issues behind it. Probably a lot of issues, but a lot more than most of the other TV shows. Also, any of the movies, excluding the Kelvin Timeline movies, with the exception of, the backstory that Spock went back in time, and so the adaptation of that is what we have now in Star Trek Online. Outside of that, we don't really deal with the Kelvin Timeline too much inside the game besides one mission, so we don't really have to worry about the Kelvin Timeline too much in our game. I will also be including most of the Star Trek Online missions, all the ones that are current inside the game to be able to be played as of January 2019, as well as all of the unavailable missions which still impact dialogue choices of our current missions inside the game. There are a few of those, and so for those ones, I will be including inside of the general canon Star Trek Online missions inside the game. I'll also be including all the Star Trek Task Force operations as well, including any Task Force operations that have been taken out of the game. So all those will be included. Later on in the video, I'll tell you how you all can help me out with some of that stuff inside the game. I will also be including a couple of sources for external lore in Star Trek Online. All of your lore writings, like the Road to 2409, as well as any of the general writings on the Arc Games website. I'm talking about some other stuff inside the game that aren't missions that are just going on. I had to create my own Google Documents database of all this info, as it's not organized at all on the Arc Games website. Once I start talking about this in a lot more depth, I will include a link to that spreadsheet, so y'all can explore it and see all that for yourself. And then hopefully one of you all or Cryptic can use that database to make a really nice interactive way to interact with a lot more of the lore in Star Trek Online, because I think that would be really cool. Alongside that, there's two promotional web links for Agents of Yesterday with a console launch that I'm also going to be including. It's not that it's necessarily necessary, but most of the stuff that's talked about in there is also referenced in the lore writings and stuff on the Arc Games website too in general. So for this stuff here, it's just more of a concise way to talk about it when I start talking about canon Star Trek Online captains. So I'll be referencing this heavily, even though this information is also in this area too. So, what I won't be including, unfortunately, will be basically any other Star Trek game out there and other written Star Trek books. This is simply because it's going to be way too hard for me to basically read all the other Star Trek books out there. It hasn't really been a thing for me. I mean, I've read a few of the really notable ones, like these ones here, which are all great, by the way. One of my captains I kind of based off of the Rom of the Way for her anyway, because that's an awesome book, by the way. Also any of the other Star Trek games in general, I'm not going to be including, even though these three are all super awesome and all in their own way. Alongside that, I won't be including any of the outdated Star Trek Online lore. This will include any of your promotional trailers. Unfortunately, some of the trailers are deceiving. Well, not fully deceiving. It's just that a lot of those trailers reference a lot of stuff in the Jake Sisko book, which is now outdated or completely changed from what the original direction of Star Trek Online was inside of everything. For what I've even talked about with people that played it during the beta, a lot of the mechanics of beta don't exist anymore or are slowly coming back. There's also several dead characters that reappear in later expansions of Star Trek Online that Jake said were dead before. So yeah, a lot of this is pretty unreliable. Most stuff that's reliable in this are already covered inside of the Star Trek Online missions in general, so it's not really necessary to really talk about this too much. I will also not be including any unavailable Star Trek missions that don't have any real relevance to the other missions that exist inside the game. There are going to be two different arcs that I will talk about that I think might deserve some mention that don't have a real good reference to everything else, but when we get into more depth in those in the upcoming months, I will dive into those and explain why. Now, when it comes to the Star Trek Online captains, as I will be talking about later on, there are 12 different Star Trek Online captains that are canon Star Trek captains. With my general assumptions behind this, it's going to be that we have 4 general factions with 12 captains. We have 3 in the Federation, 3 in the Klingon Empire, 3 in around the Republic, and 3 in our other category. 1 for each of these unique factions: Discovery Federation, TOS Federation, and Dominion. And for each one of these general factions, there is 1 tactical, 1 engineering, and 1 science captain of those, with at least 1 that's male and 1 that's female. Turns out that as I was going through it, turns out it was basically 2 male and 1 female for every single one of them, but, you know, gender equality doesn't work for everything. In terms of the reason why we're going to have 12 here is because in total, we need 12 in order to make sure that we have a captain covering every single mission that's currently canon inside of the game, which I will get to in a later video, along with more specifics in terms of all this stuff, and in terms of why I decided to go with this, even though Klingon doesn't necessarily fully need a 3rd captain. It shores up a different problem inside of the Klingon faction. In terms of figuring out the missions themselves, there's 2 parts. There's figuring out thematically who can actually physically be at certain missions, who's actually preoccupied based upon other stuff going on inside the galaxy, because there's a lot of wars, internal conflicts, and undine stuff going on throughout the early part of 2409. And then figuring out what all the missions are, which ones are technically unavailable that can impact these missions that we also have to have captains for, the relative order of missions, which has been relatively figured out inside Star Trek Online, and as well as any other implied missions that are very necessary for the game that have not been covered yet. And after I go through all this, I'll include another list of missions that should be added to the game, just based upon the raw lore of Star Trek Online. Both stuff that's included in the 2409 to 2410 timeline, as well as stuff that definitely needs to be addressed later on too. Not only do we need to know the order of the missions, but we need to figure out the travel time to our various missions, which this gets complicated. We need to know, first off, how fast our ship goes, which, you know, depending upon our captain, their relative rank and reputation inside of your faction, can very much determine what the speed is actually going to be. For these warp factors, I'm just going to be using the base default warp cores that you get with those particular tiers of ships at whatever rank that it's going to be at. And I mean, I could have done it a different way, but I felt that this was the fairest way to go, especially because with warp factors, a lot of the warp factor stuff goes beyond warp 10, which is not the way the Star Trek Online, well, that our Star Trek canon actually is. For Star Trek canon, if you're going at warp factor 10, then that's basically transwarp, and you can basically go anywhere instantly, which is, well, you can easily have a debate as to whether we actually do have transwarp in Star Trek Online, like as a regular actual thing or not. I mean, it's definitely there for convenience, whether they want to say that that's actually canon, that every single ship in the game has transwarp. Yeah, feel free to talk in the comments about that. For this, for simplicity, we're going to say that no one does. And so the tier of your ship is going to determine how good and how fast your ship is going to be. Technically, any ship in the game, by how the mechanics are designed, could have any level of warp core if everyone basically started at level 65. But for simplicity, this is how I'm going to be doing it. This is actually going to significantly impact a lot of the Federation timeline, which is significant for them. It's very important as to why we need so many Federation captains, because even the Federation tutorial takes a long time to do. Just going to throw that out there. And that one's actually a pretty long complicated mess to talk about. Alongside the travel time, we also have to figure out the raw distances, which I'm not going to be using the distances in Star Trek Online. I'm going to be using Star Trek star charts for everything. I felt that this was just the best way to go about doing it. There are going to be some cases that I'm going to have to do a best guess inside of a location in star charts based upon what Star Trek Online has created for various planets. Those ones will be on a case-by-case basis, and I'll talk about those inside of videos later. Yeah, this is why we have many captains. Really, it's because this travel time, with how slow ships are, the real distances between different places, and we have a lot of various conflicts going on. Now, when it comes to these total time things, I'm not going to be factoring in time dilation, simply because starships travel through subspace. That's kind of just how the mechanic works. That's how they can travel faster than light. Technically in physics, like as you approach the speed of light, there is time dilation effects that start going on. Star Trek doesn't really address this too much. Whenever it has in the past, like in The Next Generation, they addressed it improperly. I've read several books about that, but I mean, for simplicity in talking about this, I'm not going to be factoring in time dilation going into any of this, even though in real life, not in Star Trek, but in real life, time dilation would be a significant factor in all of the sub-warp travel inside the game. Now, for Star Trek, just as an FYI, they divide a lot of their sectors into cubes, and so of 20 by 20 by I think it's like 18 or 19. It's been a little bit since I've done some of those calculations. I still have a lot more to do over the next few weeks. Then this is just little things just showing that yes, Star Trek Online in their sector revamp did try to use star charts the best that they could. But they didn't get all of them right, and some that they just refused to change because it messed with the tutorial of the Federation one especially. Well, I'm going to be correcting that. Now, for all this stuff inside the game, for the lore things and such, that's basically about it. Now, for the other stuff from last Saturday, what I didn't cover was our communication and discussion in our community. And over the past about 2.5 to 3 weeks, I've gotten a lot of hate emails, as well as a couple of, well, one really prominent DPS person that really doesn't like the channel anymore. These are kind of like my general guidelines personally that I hope that you all will strongly consider whenever you're posting stuff to my YouTube videos. Like when it comes down to it, this channel is here for you to learn. That's what it's about. I mean, obviously, a lot of your comments have also improved my gameplay, and ordering of abilities and those types of things. It's not just saying, oh yeah, here is the meta DPS build, everyone should be doing that. No. There are many different ways to play the game. There are a lot of people inside Star Trek Online that disagree with that. They think that everyone should be a high DPS person, and that's it. You know, DPS is not the end-all be-all, and speed, along with that, is not the end-all be-all either. Just keep in mind with any of your comments that you have your own bias. Everyone else has their own bias too, based upon how you're raised, based upon how you've interacted with the game in the past. You're going to have your own perceptions of how the game works, and that's okay. And we can all be technically correct and have productive discussion in which we both learn from each other, but don't always have to come to the exact same conclusion at the end either. Just please don't just do like long-winded arguments that don't really go anywhere. Like if you're basically posting on a channel basically saying that this person's terrible or that I'm terrible, well, if you say that I'm terrible, I really don't care. But if you say that, you know, this other person's terrible, that their build's terrible, whatever, I don't really tolerate that. I've had to remove several posts already because of that. Please, we're a Star Trek community. We should be positive and look forward and say that the future, even though we have some dark stuff that's probably coming ahead, that we can come out from it and have an awesome civilization later, and race and everything later. Please be positive. Yes, feel free to criticize, but be positive in it. Don't just belittle and say that people are terrible. Please. There have been a couple of you that I've had to take off in terms of things as well because you were defending me on the channel, even though you didn't do it in this type of way. You did it more of like saying that this person's terrible. Please be positive in it as much as possible, much as is possible. We are a smart community. We don't need to dredge and name calling, those types of things inside of this community. These are my biases over here that I know for sure. Obviously, I have other biases too. I mean, I am religious. I mean, if you just look up CounterYolo on Facebook and find my personal Facebook page, you'll be able to see exactly what religion I am. I'm not hiding that. I've been that all my life, and yeah, I've had to go through my own trials to figure that out, all for myself. Now, as I said, these are basically the big things that I don't like. If you're going to say your opinion, that's totally fine. Just recognize what your own bias is, and don't say that your bias is a fact in Star Trek Online. Or if you're going to have discussions about stuff that's not Star Trek Online in the comments, that's totally fine too. Just make sure that you recognize what's a bias versus what's an actual fact. Again, don't use name calling, don't use swearing, and all those types of things. And there's just a couple examples for that. This is a discussion. For instance, someone might say, hey, ability A seems better to me in most cases over ability B that you talked about in this video for reasons C and D. What are your thoughts on this? I think that's a great way to talk about it. Instead of saying, for instance, hey, ability A sucks, you should be using ability B instead, or you suck at this game and should stop playing. Unfortunately, I've seen this quite a bit, both on the regular Star Trek Online forums, as well as even comments on this channel that I've had to take off. It's disappointing. Please use this type of manner. Here's just a couple of other types of other things. Generally, open-ended questions are pretty good. Feel free to also just fact-check me in my videos. Please do this. I'm obviously not going to be perfect. And, you know, and yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of work to know to do this, or to include stats for different abilities inside the description. Those are totally good too. Short, close-ended statements are okay if, you know, you make sure you understand what your opinions are. Like especially if it's short, close-ended negative statements. This is kind of case-by-case basis as to whether I'm going to permit them on the channel. As long as you're being helpful, I'm going to still let them be. Again, there's like, I've tried my best to try to define some of this, but when it comes to conduct, there's really no great way to define all this. So, yeah, I'm doing the best I can. Hopefully, as the channel goes more, I'll be able to define this a little bit better going on. Now, for my favorite Star Trek episode on communication, I have to talk about Darmok. It's from Next Generation Season 5, Episode 2. Basically, the Enterprise is trying to be with a species that speaks in a language that the Universal Translator doesn't work, because it's not word to word. It's using words that talk about different ideas, which the translator isn't really designed for. Now, this is simplistic in which the species uses all English words, but those groupings of English words don't equate to generally what you think of for English. Like for them, river is river, but when they say like the river wide or something, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about something else. Long story short, in this mission, they try to communicate. They can't. The Tamarians decide to beam Picard and their captain to the surface so that they can hopefully work together and come up with being able to learn how to talk to each other. Riker and the others on the Enterprise start panicking, basically. They make rushed assumptions, and their assumptions and their attempt to try to solve the situation quickly just devolve the situation worse. In fact, if Picard didn't learn the language on the surface and basically stopped it from getting even worse than it was, the Enterprise would have been lost in the mission. My favorite quotes in this, Picard says at the beginning, "In my experience, communication is a matter of patience and imagination. I would like to believe that these are qualities that we have in sufficient measure." And yeah, I mean, like, that's definitely the way that communication typically should be. Like, I mean, like, communication isn't always going to be like this pretty thing with like rose petals on the ground and like snow falling and stuff. Communication can be hard, and so being able to have patience and also to be able to try to think of other ways to approach both how you're thinking about a problem, but also however you're trying to communicate with someone else, especially if you have a language barrier, that can be very difficult. Also, as Counselor Troy said, a single word can lead to tragedy. One word misspoken or misunderstood, and that could happen here if we fail, or anywhere, whether it's in the comments section, somewhere else on the forums, or just in your everyday life. Last quote here before we get into our longer quote. As Captain Picard said at the very end of the episode, the Tamarian was willing to risk all of us just for the hope of communication and connection. Now that door is open between our peoples. That commitment more to him than his own life. And to a small extent, you could say that that's what this channel is here for too. Alongside positive communication, it's supposed to be more of a safe haven for those who don't want to be a DPS chaser inside the game, to be able to have a more comfortable place to talk. Whether that's here, whether that's on Facebook, if you want to talk to me privately in an email, or if you want to talk on Twitter, that's fine. I'm obviously not going to respond super quickly to a lot of this because I'm not a super techie person, but that's kind of the hope of what this channel is. Of one of the best exchanges, I obviously had to cut a bit out of this, but after the first couple times that Riker failed to try to get Picard back, and struggling about not being able to communicate with the Tamarians, kind of like halfway through this exchange, he says, if you know how they think, shouldn't we be able to get something across to them? And Data responds saying, "No, sir. Situation is analogous to understanding the grammar of the language, but none of the vocabulary." Which we actually, in a lot of discussions where we have different biases or different perceptions on life or perceptions of how we should play a game, we can definitely see this too, in which we're using the same vocabulary and grammar, but because of how it's constructed, even though we have a perception of how someone thinks, it's still hard to communicate with them. And then Crusher says, as they mentioned with Juliet and Shakespeare earlier, if I didn't know what Juliet was, what she was doing on the balcony, the image alone wouldn't have any meaning, even though you would have understood that, yes, Juliet's on a balcony. And then Troy continues saying like that's correct. For instance, we know that Darmok was a great hero, a hunter, and that Tanagra was an island, but that's it. Without the details, there is no understanding. We can say a lot of stuff, but if we don't explain it to those who don't fully understand it immediately, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever. As Data says later, it is necessary for us to learn the narrative from which the Tamarians draw their imagery. Given our current relations, that does not appear likely, because they had misinterpreted stuff several times, and it had become a very tense situation. The TLDR of this is that conflict in basically any medium doesn't typically bring understanding and learning. It typically takes patience, discussion, and experience to do so, which is what the Tamarians were trying to teach Picard. So you know what, if we can't communicate verbally, maybe we can communicate in other ways and potentially learn a little bit to be able to communicate a little bit more. And to an extent they were successful, to an extent the Enterprise failed, because they weren't able to create allies. They weren't able, they went from neutral to bad to kind of neutral again. It was how the episode went. Now for the TLDW of this video, sorry that the communication thing took a long time, but TLDW of this is my Star Trek Online lore videos are going to take a lot of time to make it right. I'm not going to be rushing this. For the next few weeks, I'll go over like the road to 2409, just because that's stuff that's easy to do. And I'll be doing that until my information is ready to go. Talk about the general actual Star Trek Online timeline for 2409 and 2410. Now for the current project itself, I have a Google Doc, or I guess I should say Google spreadsheet of the compiled sources of all the canon stuff inside the game. It's just about finished. I've got a few more articles to go through, and then it'll be basically ready. And I'm just starting on distance calculations for all of the missions. So that is underway right now. The moment that those calculations are finished, it shouldn't take very much longer beyond that, maybe a day or two. And I know I'll be able to actually start doing real good videos about the Star Trek Online timeline. The biggest things that y'all could help me with is, first off, it's not fully clear to me the exact locations of a lot of the various TFOs inside the game. So if y'all could help me out by helping me in terms of like where maybe exactly or roughly where it should be for each one of those TFOs, that would be extremely helpful. Also, if there's any lore sources to info beyond Star Trek Online and ArcGames.com that you think I should be using for my analysis, feel free to tell me that as well. With this other stuff doing it, I'm probably not going to have enough time to fully review it. So like a Spark Notes or Reader's Digest version of the source and the most important tidbits from that source that is referenced in Star Trek Online would be most helpful for me. For those of you that have information for that to help me out with this, that would be excellent and awesome. And of course for communication, that I did a super big rant on because, well, I felt like I needed to for the channel. TLDW, assume the best in people. Just assume the best, try your best to not be angry, and be patient and willing to talk things out. Especially outside of your comfort zone and your general perspective of how you believe the world, whether the real world or like, the world of Star Trek Online should work. And hey, through your discussions, trying to be open-minded, you're probably going to learn something along the way. But yeah, anyway, that's basically it for this video. Hopefully this was a little bit beneficial to you, to let you know what I am doing right now. This probably wasn't as super helpful to give you a lot of good information, but at least it's there to let you know that no, I'm not just doing nothing. There's a lot of stuff that I'm working on. Just try to give you good content for the future. And it's going to take a while because, it's just me working on this for the most part. Besides, what other stuff I've been able to find, what people have done in the past to help out with the Star Trek Online timeline. That's going to help a little bit, but a lot of this I'm going to have to do on my own. So anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all on Thursday.